What's up guys, welcome to the software engineering channel. In this series we are going to be looking at functions and method. And don't forget that this particular course is a continuation of zero to master JavaScript course that we've been considering for a while. Let's dive right in guys. Now when we talk about functions is a building block in programming generally. It's a paradigm in programming generally whereby when you want to perform a function, or when you want your program or your application to do certain things in multiple places, you can either write that block of code that is needed to perform that action in all of the multiple places whereby you need the action to be triggered, or you contain all of those body of code into a particular black box in which we call function. So now, instead of repeating yourself over and over wherever you want that function to be executed, you simply call that function, you simply invoke that function. So the function basically acts as a black box that you basically invoke when you want a particular action to be executed. For example, let's consider the function calculate price. Now, if we really want to go deeper into calculate price function, you would basically see all of the lines of code, all of the algorithm that calculate price has to execute before we get the actual price. But to be honest, we really do not care about all of this algorithm, and that's why we just write it once, and anytime we need to invoke this calculate price, we simply invoke calculate price at any point where we want it to actually calculate the price. We call calculate price, and we can do that multiple times instead of repeating all of this body of code in every part of our application where we want prices to actually be calculated. This is what a function is basically. So now let's go to Visual Studio Code to make sense of all of this that we have learned. Open Visual Studio Code, and I have my browser side by side. Awesome. So the first thing we're going to be considering is how to actually declare our function in JavaScript. It is quite simple. So to declare a function in JavaScript, you start with the keyword function. You write the name of the function. In our case, the name of our function is, let's start with something very simple. Say hello, and you have these brackets after the name of your function. Then after that, you have your curly braces. Your curly braces simply form some type of border. So it basically just shows you the restricted area within your curly braces form some form of border around your function. It means within your curly braces is where you are allowed to write your body of code, which your function is meant to execute. So we're just going to start with something very simple. Our function is simply going to say hello. Hello there. Hello world. Let's run this our browser. I'm using a plugin called Live Server to run my HTML. You can either use Live Server, or you actually go to the HTML file and double click on it to open it for you. But the reason why I'm using Live Server is because Live Server does auto reload for me. So each time I make a changes, it reloads on its own. So that gives me some form of comfort. Okay, so you would notice that we do not have let me clear my console. We do not have what we logged into our console. The reason for that is because all we have done here is to actually declare our function, right? So aside from declaring your function, when you want to use the function, you would need to invoke the function. So what we have done is declaration of the function. So when we want to actually call the function, because JavaScript is not going to assume that you actually need to invoke the function now. So it gives you that ability to specify where you want the function to actually be invoked. So we can actually invoke our function by calling the name of the function, typing out the name of the function, and adding these brackets at the back. So when we save now and check our console, we should have hello there and hello world. All right. So when we refresh, we should have hello there and hello world. So what this simply means is we have declared our function and now we are invoking the function. So this is what we call invoking. Invoking. This is how you invoke a function in JavaScript. So after you have declared your function to do a particular thing for you, the next thing for you to do is to invoke the function. If you don't invoke the function, it's not going to work. You're not going to see the results. You're not going to see what you expect. So after you have declared your function, the next thing you want to do is to invoke your function. And the way you invoke your function is by simply calling the name of the function, typing it out. Now you could actually be confused to say, how is it that I could actually place the invocation of my function anywhere? So I'm placing this below. I'm placing it below the declaration of the function, right? I could actually cut this out, the declaration of the function, cut the declaration of the function out and place it somewhere down. So my point is you still get to see hello world, hello dear. This is supposed to be the pattern, because when JavaScript calls this function, it then go down your code to search for where the function is, right? But you could actually invoke your function anywhere in JavaScript, and I'll tell you the reason why that is possible. So this is possible as well in JavaScript, right? So the position of calling the function does not actually matter. This is possible because of a feature in JavaScript called hoisting, right? So what that basically means is when JavaScript is actually about to run your program, it transfers every declaration at the top of your script. So it basically reorders your script, and to be honest, you really do not need to go in depth as regards that or wanting to know how that works. For now, just have it at the back of your mind that order does not really matter when you're using this type of declaration. Order doesn't really matter. As long as you have your function declared, you can actually invoke your function at any point in time, right? Awesome. So aside from declaring our function this way, we could actually assign our function to a variable. So let's call this speak. We can say equal to a function speak right? And we can do console.log I am speaking. Now this is of course called expression whenever you are assigning anything at all to a variable, and I'm going to make this a const, not a var. And the reason why I'm making it a const is just so that I'm unable to change this variable. If you do not understand where to use your const or where to use your let, I would advise that you refer back to our variable and data type video that we treated last week. We treated that subject matter extensively, so you want to refer back to it. So this is another way of declaring your function, although this is in an expressive format. So the same way you could actually invoke your speak variable as a function, and when we run that function you would also have I am speaking. So what you basically did is you have taken all of this expression and you have inserted it into this guy, right? So when you invoke that particular constant, it's more like you are invoking the function, and that's why there's basically no difference. You can also assign what we call parameters to your function. Your function is able to accept values and use that value to perform whatever action it is you want that function to perform with that dynamic value. So let's see an example here. So basically we are looking at parameters. Let's have a function that says hello, but this time it actually accepts the name of an individual. It accepts the name of an individual. Sorry, I'm used to a type language. That's I'm adding a string there. So you're not supposed to have string here. You just type in whatever parameter it is it's accepting. So let's do a console.log, and we are going to concatenate this name with some string. Good to have you around. Now, as we have previously established, this particular script isn't going to do anything. This application isn't going to do anything because we only declared our function. We've not invoked our function. So if we want this particular application to be functional, we need to invoke this function. So we invoke this function, but this time notice that your function requires a name. Your function requires a name. Now, at the time of declaring your function, this name is called parameter. Your parameter is basically a value that is received during your function declaration. So at this point, it's called parameter. But when you are actually supplying the value at the point of invocation, it is called an argument. So at this point, if I say let name equal to dummy, save that in a variable. Let me say my name so we don't mix both of them up, and I supply this variable. Now if I run this function, and we'll see what we have in the console, and you see we have dummy, good to have you around, right? We can always change this. We can change it to John Doe. We should see John Doe, good to have you around. So what that basically means is you can actually pass a value into your function. A real life example of this might be, let's try to write a function. Let's write a function that had two numbers together. Let's do that. Function that has two numbers together. So let's say add two numbers. Now, because our function is adding two numbers together, we know we are expecting to have number one. I'm going to call it number one, and we are expecting to have number two numbers together. And we expect that this function actually adds these two numbers together and print it out in the console. So we can say let a result equal to number one, which what I'm basically saying is take whatever value we have in number one and add it to whatever value we have in the variable number two, and of course save it into our variable results. And when you are done with that, I want you to console.log print out these results into our browser. And of course, if you save this without invoking this function and supplying the necessary arguments, nothing is going to happen. You can see that our console is dry, right? So we have to invoke this function to actually put it to use. So we have two numbers. So let's say we are adding 45 and we are adding 56. So at the point of supplying these numbers, what you are supplying is an argument. It is important for you to actually understand the difference between arguments and parameters. And that's why I'm actually stressing it. A parameter is what you supply, is what you receive during the declaration of your function. You are telling, when you are building your function at the point of declaring your function, you are building the function in such a way that whenever this function is to be called, those values have to be passed into the function, because the function depends on those values to get executed. When we start actually applying this to real life stuff, you would really understand how this actually works. Yeah. So but when you are invoking and you are passing the real values that the function needs to perform whatever action it wants to perform, at that point, those values you are passing, in our case 45 and 56, are called arguments. So let's do a save on this and see what we have. We should have 101. Awesome. So our function is also capable of returning values. Up until now, our function has not been returning any value. It has basically been executing, performing the action in itself. There are times whereby you need your function to get some inputs, process the inputs, and then return the inputs, not necessarily to the end user. You need that function to return the inputs to another part of your program that actually needs that value as its own input, right? So let's see an example here. So let's say we're given a problem. And we are told to add, I'm trying to figure out a problem spontaneously. Add two numbers together and multiply results by 10. Now we're told to write a function that adds two numbers together and multiply the results by 10. Now, in this case, we want to simulate the fact that our function is also capable of returning values, right? So we can split this into two. We can split this problem into two. So we can write a function that adds two numbers together first, and then whatever results that function gives us, we are going to simply multiply that result by 10 and would return the results to our end user. That's what we're going to be doing here. So the first thing we want to do is to write that function that add two numbers together. And we've done that previously, so it's going to be pretty easy for you to code along. Number 2, curly braces. Right. So what we are going to do in this case, and I'm going to do this using the to method that we used here. I'm going to do it in the declarative style, and I'm going to use the expression style as well. But I just want you to get how it actually works, right? Get the core of how function actually works. It's so simple, and it's no more than this, right? So say var results equals to number 1 plus number 2. Now to return these results, we use the keyword literally called return. We say return results. At this point, we are not doing anything. What we are saying is whenever this function is called, it should return this result. And this result is basically the addition of number 1 and number 2. If you are smart, you would see that we can actually turn these 2 lines of code into 1 line of code. So I'm going to comment this out just so that you can refer back to it. Or simply we can say return number 1 plus number 2, and that's it, guys. That's it. So we are simply returning the results of number 1 and number 2. So what your program is going to do is going to add these 2 numbers together and then return the results. Now, so don't forget what our program said we should do is to write a function that add 2 numbers together and multiply the result rather by 10. So now let's write another function that multiply results by 10. So what this function does is it accepts any value called results, anything at all. Of course, you know that this result is basically a variable, is a parameter, so you can call yours anything. You can call it value, you can call it whatever, but I choose to call it results. I think that makes more sense to me. And in this case, I'm also telling my multiply results by 10 to the products. I was trying to think of a reasonable name. I was going to use results, but you can't use results because you already have results up here. So I'm going to say multiply whatever is in results by 10. Save it in product, and then also return products. Now, if we save these 2 functions, let me maintain this one up here just so you can understand. If we save these 2 functions, nothing is going to happen, right? So this is just me stressing the fact that the invocation of your function is actually very important. So you notice that we do not have results because we did not invoke the function. All we did was to declare our function. Now, what we want to do is to say var, and forgive that I'm using var. Actually, we are not supposed to be using var. We're supposed to be using let's, and you can find out the reason for that in our previous video. So we can say let addition results be equals to, now we can call those 2 functions. Can call these 2 functions to add, in our case, for 35 and 60. So it's going to add 35 and 60, and the result of the addition of 35 and 60 is going to be saved in this particular variable. Now we can now also say let product results be equal to multiply results by 10. Now, which result are we multiplying by 10? It's our addition result. Now, because our function are returning a value, you will notice that when this is done executing, it's going to return the results into this variable. And when this is done executing as well, it's going to return this product into this variable. Now we can actually print out our results to our end user. We can say total products. This is just me being a designer. So let's print out the actual results. Product results. Now let's save our results. Save our code. Now can you see that? So basically what it did was it took the addition of, and we can check out our code. Actually, we can do a debug on our code just so you can see how JavaScript actually behaves. Let's do a debug on our code. Now let's step through our code. Now you notice that the first place that JavaScript hit was this function. Can you see it? Add two numbers. Now when we go deeply into that function, now you see, now JavaScript invoked the function because we actually called the function. And notice what was passed into number one. Can you see that what was passed into number one is 35? And what was passed into number two is 60. And where did those numbers come from? Those numbers came from the arguments that we passed into the function. Now what JavaScript is now going to do, notice that it's going to actually add number one and number two into our results. And when you look at our local window here, you can see that the result is 95. Now you see the next thing it does. The next thing it does is to actually return this 95 into this addition result. Now when you hover on this addition result, you notice that it's now 95. The same thing happens to the next function. It passes the variable into the parameter, which is 95, and it multiplies it by 10 and passes the results down into the product result variable. And then we have our results printed, and that's all. And that's all. So basically that is how JavaScript behaves when it comes to passing of arguments, working with parameters, working with multiple parameters. We've seen how to work with single parameter. This was where we worked with a single parameter. Single parameter basically means we are adding just a single parameter, and we've seen how to work with multiple parameters where we have more than one parameters in our function. And we've also seen how to return values from our function. So the next thing we are going to quickly look at is how to actually set default values, default parameters in our function. So say for example, we want it to be such that even if this user that is invoking this function does not pass any arguments, we want it to be such that these numbers should always be nothing less than 20, right? That means by default this number should be 20. But if the user passes any arguments, then that argument should override these particular parameters. So the way we do that is by using JavaScript default parameters. So what we can do is to say number one is 20, and we can say number two is equal to 20 as well. Now when we save this code, I don't want us to debug again so we don't waste time. We've seen that previously. So let's have it saved again. Now you notice that we have 400, which is, if you calculate it, that's the right result. So what it basically did was, notice that we did not add any arguments here, of which our function requires that we have 2 arguments. But you would notice that these arguments are now not compulsory. They are not required, because we have a default value for these arguments. We have a default values for them. And so once you do not pass any arguments, the parameter simply picks up their default value, and that's what happened here. Now, if we do not pass this default value, let's see how JavaScript is going to scream at us. If we do not have default values and we still do not pass a parameter, let's save this function and see what we're going to get. Now, see, you get not a number. Not a number. What that simply means is your result does not make any sense. It is not within the range of your number system, right? So that's what you get when you do not pass arguments and you do not pass default values. So you can have default values. And now, if you actually pass an argument, I want to prove it to you that your argument overrides your default values. Your default values are just some kind of catch-all net, a safe net, such that even when the whoever it is that is invoking your function do not pass the necessary parameters, your function can pick up the default parameters for your default parameters value for your parameters. So I know there are a lot of parameters and values going on around, but I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. I mean, I know you're smart enough. So when you save this, notice what our result is. Now our result is not 400, our result is 950. What that basically tells you that JavaScript did not use the default parameters. It used the arguments passed. So your arguments, when passed, would always override your default values. Now, the next thing for us to look at is the difference between a function and a method. Those look like very synonymous terms, but they are different when it comes to programming language. Your function and method are quite different. Now, most of the times, all the times actually, your function is basically a stand-alone. Functions are standalone. Basically, functions are standalone. So you'll notice that all of the functions we'll be writing are standalone. They basically they are declared alone. They are not entangled with any other stuff. But the same is not the case for a method. A method is a special type of function, actually. A method is a special type of function that is found within an object. All right. So the reason why I'm not going to stress this method too much is because we have not looked at the concept of objects. But basically, from the little understanding we have as regards what an object is from our last class, I can explain a bit of what a method is. So when we have, say for example, we have an object called car. So let's create an object called car. Now a car has different properties and functionalities. So we represent those characteristics of a car by its properties. So we can say the car has a speed of 250 kilometer, whatever that is. 250 kilometer. The car is colored red. Now these are the properties of the car. Now we can also represent the behavior of the car by a method. Now we can also say the car can move. right? We can say the car has the ability to move. Now we are representing this by a method, and we can just do a console.log move just to represent moving. That's a method. Now we can also say the car has the ability to accelerate. So what we are doing is we are representing the behavior of the car, right? We are representing the behavior of the car in terms of a method. Now you will notice that this is similar to a function. It's actually a function because methods at the core are functions, but they are functions that are embedded within an object. So any function that you see embedded within an object is called a method. That's basically the difference between a method and a function. So let's complete this. Say move faster. So when we invoke our car, you can see that we have methods, and you can see that Visual Studio Code already calls methods for you. There are methods, and you can also see that we have its properties, right? So we can actually invoke it with this method and do a save. It's not a function. Oh, I'm sorry. We do not have speed. Speed is not a function. We're supposed to have accelerate, not speed. Let's save. And you can see move faster. So this is what a method is. A method is basically a function embedded within an object, and functions are usually standalone. In the course of building your application, you would have courses to use a method when you need to embed to represent the characteristic of a particular object. Then you'll be using the method, right? When you need to write a functionality that needs to stand alone, of course, you are referring to the use of a function. This is the difference between functions and methods. So let's consider the concept of callbacks in JavaScript. Callbacks. JavaScript heavily relies on the concept of callbacks, and that's why it's an important concept for us to look at. So basically, callbacks are functions as well. They are functions that are called when their parent function is done performing a particular action. All of that is going to make sense to you when we check out an example. So let's say, for example, we have a function that tries to log a user in. Login user. Now, what this function does is it takes the user's username and password, right? It takes the usernames and password, and now we also have a function that shows user profile. Now, of course, you know that we cannot show a user profile unless we have logged the user in, right? So that means this show user profile is dependent on logging user in, right? So we can mimic the concept of a callback. Now, if we write a function, let's write a function that actually shows user's profile. So let's have a function that shows user's profile. And to show user profile, we basically are going to have user information. So let's say we'll have username, or we'll have user first name. Let's just say user first name, just so to keep it simple. So we'll have console.log welcome to your dashboard, just so to simulate some sort of private page. and we'll do a console.log first name. Now, of course, this particular function is not expected to run until the user has been verified, the user has been logged in. So what we want to do is to say, now we can actually create a function called log user in. Now, in this function, we can pass a callback. You can call it anything actually, but I'm going to call it a callback. Now, this callback is a parameter, but instead of passing the normal variables that we've been passing, note that previously when we pass a parameter, we would usually pass a string or we pass a number, as in the case of adding two numbers together and saying hello. But in this case, I'm actually going to be passing a function as a parameter. So what I'm saying now is try to log this user in, and I'm going to simulate logging the user in with console.log. Just going to say authenticating user, simulating that, and I'm going to say user credential, user successfully logged in. So simulate user successfully logged in. Now immediately the user is done logging in, immediately the user has been verified as a user, we want to call our callback. I think if I change this name, it's going to make more sense to us. So let me call it next function. Next function. Now this next function is called a callback. It's called a callback. And the reason why it is called a callback is because this next function is depending on its parent function log user in to get called, hence the name callback. So it is not called immediately, it is called when a particular parent function is done executing. Now when we actually invoke, of course, you know, when we save this, nothing is going to happen, right? Now let's invoke log user in. So let's call log user in, and note that log user in expects a function, a callback. Now I'm going to pass this show user profile, and note that show user profile actually also expects a first name, right? This is going to be a little bit complicated for us, so I'm going to remove the first name. So I'm just going to pass this. Just going to pass this. Now notes. Now you can see we called log user in, so it did authenticating user, user successfully logged in, welcome to your dashboard. Now note that we did not have welcome to your dashboard here, but what we did was we passed this function into a parent function. Now this particular function in this application is called a callback. Callbacks are functions that depends on a parent function to finish executing first before they get executed. And you are obviously going to see the use of callbacks in numerous occasions when we begin to delve into writing real life application with all of these concepts that we have learned. That's it, guys. That's it about functions and method. Don't forget to smash the like button if you've learned a lot from this video tutorial, and also hit the subscribe button to get updates from us when a new video is released within this course series. Do stay awesome. See you in the next one, guys. Bye.